to those of you who are new to this kind of event and what takes place, my name's Andrew Stuck. I'm a co-producer of Walk, Listen, Create. And Walk, Listen, Create is a not-for-profit supporting artists, performers, writers, anyone who makes work to be experienced or about walking. So we're fairly niche. And in fact, our guest today, Oliver, hasn't just written about walking. He's written about other means of getting to pilgrimage places. So we'll see how we get on. We'll keep him on the walking tracks. So basically how this will start is I'll introduce Oliver. We'll chat for about 10 or 15 minutes, in which time, hopefully, you guys will have thought up some questions too to quiz him. And then we'll open it up to you and we'll invite you to actually ask the questions. And if you don't want to, we'll read them out if you write them in the chat. Okay, so let me try and tell you something about Oliver. Oliver Smith is an award-winning travel journalist, and for 10 years he traveled the world working for Lonely Planet magazine. Today his work can be found in various outlets, FT Weekend, The Times, and National Geographic Traveller. He also writes a regular walking column for Waitrose Weekend. Who would have thought that Waitrose had a walking column? Well, there we go. Oliver has been named Travel Writer of the Year on 4 occasions in the UK and is the recipient of the Lowell Thomas Gold Award for reporting in Outside magazine in the United States. His first book was The Atlas of Abandoned Places, a journey through the world's forgotten wonders, and was published by Octopus in 2022. And we're here to talk about his first narrative travel book, On a Holy Island, a modern pilgrimage across Britain, in which he sets out to radically reframe our idea of pilgrimage in Britain by retracing sacred travel made across time. And it was published in March this year. So welcome, Oliver. I think we should start really with the most obvious one is, what's your definition of pilgrimage?
It's a good question. But unfortunately, it's also a very difficult question. And I think it's also hard for me to say what my definition is. I think it's hugely subjective. I mean, for some people I spoke to, pilgrimage is about being with other people, having that companionship by your side and kind of having a shared goal of walking to a specific destination. But for other people, pilgrimage is all about being alone and being solitary and having that solitude as being a conduit to the divine. For some people, it's very much about a fixed location. So if you think about somewhere like Canterbury or Walsingham or wherever it might be, it's about that final goal. But then for other people, pilgrimage can be all about having no destination at all. And when you think about the early Christian saints and how they sort of strode for some indeterminate point across the horizon, and it was very much just about aimless roving. So it's something that's extremely hard to pin down. I think probably the best definition that I can provide is that it's a kind of travel where there's something at play beyond what's visible, a kind of supercharged travel, if you will. And it feels to me that underpinning pilgrimage is this idea that whenever you set out on a journey, you will find waymarkers that will help you navigate the far greater distance of your own lifetime, and that it's sort of, it's kind of a harvest of wisdom to be found on the road. That's my kind of philosophy of pilgrimage.
Well, that's nice and broad, covers a lot of things. Tell us a little bit about which came first. Was it something that you've been researching for a long time, or did you kind of think, wow, this is an opportunity in my life to write a book? I've written lots of articles and stuff like that, and now I want to sit down and write a book-length feature. What sort of came first? Since when have you been a pilgrim or a pilgrim researcher?
So I think there was a sort of almost a guiding hand. I mean, I'm not really inclined to believe too much in fate or kind of a greater destiny, but it just happened that in in the year 2022, I got commissioned a bunch of articles. One which was about Iona and kayaking around Iona. Another which was about a journey across Norfolk to the Marian Shrine at Walsingham. And then by another sort of turn of fate, I did a project with the British Pilgrimage Trust, and it was almost these three things happened at once. And it was sort of at the end of that process that I thought I really want to write a pilgrimage book. Not to bore you too much with the mechanics of writing the book, I came up with a proposal that was really quite wacky. And my agent put it out to a number of publishers, and all of them looked at it and said, "This is drivel. There's no way in hell we're going to publish this." And until it came to Bloomsbury, who looked at it and said, "This is drivel. There's no way we're going to publish this, but we like your style and we'd like to try something different with you." So that's how this book arose. It's kind of a book about that profiles 12 different places, which are places of pilgrimage. And I think that word pilgrimage, I mean, or the idea of pilgrimage, it just unlocks them all on a deeper level. And kind of what I wanted to do was to sort of reveal that they have this sort of shadow life that goes on beyond what's visible when people invest them with all kinds of expectations, all kinds of dreams, all kinds of emotions. That was kind of the approach that I settled on in the end.
And what's the kind of shape of the book itself? Because you just mentioned there it's 12 places, but
Yes.
I remember, because I read it about a month ago now, and I remember almost in the first chapter you sort of say, "Oh, we're coming to Lindisfarne, and the reason why we're doing that is we're sort of approaching from the east." I don't know whether you were coming from Nazareth or Bethlehem or what you were up to, but you were up to something. So yeah, can you? What's that? Tell us about what the shape was, and
Yes,
how did you come to? Did you start with a shape, or how was it made or put together in that sense?
It's I wasn't coming from Nazareth or Bethlehem. I'd walked across from Northumberland onto Lindisfarne, and then did an about turn, and then came back again, which is the kind of the usual way of doing it. But no, it's a good question. I mean, what guides the book is structured around time, really, and the idea is it's a pilgrimage, a series of pilgrimages across time, and it begins by tracing hints of sacred journeys in the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, journeys which we're never going to know whether they were pilgrimages or not, but we can guess, we can kind of imagine something from the lie of the land there. It goes through Christian pilgrimage, which is the kind of the middle of the book, and then in the end it ends with more modern pilgrimage, which is often pilgrimage that's set apart from religion. How football stadiums, pubs, and also festivals have pilgrimage dynamics to them, even if they're not necessarily tied to a formal religion. So moving through the book, you sort of move through the millennia, through the centuries, through the decades. So it was time that really sort of provided the structure to the book, really.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I know from what you've told me already was you actually wrote this in super quick time. I mean, the book itself refers to things going on almost earlier this year. I mean, I don't know how you and your editor managed to make that happen so quickly. But I mean, perhaps tell people why you had such a short time, and then tell us a little bit about how you actually made that happen in such a short time, because so many people love writing, have this concept of writing a book, but to actually get it out is tough.
Of course, yeah, it is very true. I'm going to give you quite a disappointing answer here, really. I feel about the speed of why I wrote a book within a space of about 8-9 months, and why I timetabled it very rigidly to the word count in every day and the travel that was necessary. I mean, just being very frank, it's the economics of writing a book that they didn't allow me many years of gazing out the window and waiting for the muse to sing. I had to go and find the muse and grab it by the neck and throttle it, really. It was a fairly fast process, but it was also at the same time a very it was very emotionally involving. because I've worked with piecemeal across many projects for many years, and I was on staff many years working on many projects as a journalist at Lonely Planet. But just to be kind of plunging down the rabbit hole and being living in your own head as a sort of a kind of semi-hermit for 9 months at a time, and having this book as your companion, I mean, all the cliches are true. You have moments where you kind of have on this sort of summit of excitement and giddy with what you've written, and then you have moments where you're sort of lying in bed, prostate at 12 midday, kind of spurring yourself into action and feeling quite low about it all. So yeah, it was 8-9 months of really intense work on this. I think some people really do. I do know some writers who sort of really struggle with the with the act of putting words on a page. I think because my training is as a journalist, I studied journalism at university, and I've been a journalist and I've worked word counts and deadlines for so long. It was perhaps a little easier for me than it was for many people. But no, it is a real wrestling match writing a book, where you're sort of really just competing against yourself, really.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, are you one of these lucky people who put pen to paper and the first draft is the one that goes in, or are you a continual crosser out and looking back and checking your notes? How does it work for Oliver Smith?
Just constant. I'm a constant meddler, and I need to be saved from myself when it comes to meddling. Like I need to, for my own good, put the draft in my inbox and press the send button. Otherwise, I'll be tinkering for all eternity, and it will be never be ready. But no, I never go through sort of specific drafts. It's just a constant process of reading and revising. I feel the best process for me is just having fresh eyes on your writing as many times as possible. And that means, getting up early, getting your eyes on it before you even do anything, rinsing your mind out by reading something else, by going for a walk, by having some exercise, and then getting back to it again with your eyes slightly fresher, and just kind of constantly trying to see it as anew as many times as you can. That's what's always worked for me. It's not a kind of silver bullet, but it's how I've learned to write.
Okay, so let's move on to a bit of the content and find out about these pilgrimages. I mean, of all the ones that you undertook, were there any that you've undertaken and not written about? Whether a few chucked out because they weren't of high enough quality, or they were
absolutely.
Yeah.
There were so many dead ends. I mean, there were about 2 or 3 chapters I embarked on and then canned halfway through. There were any number of places where I went there and thought this just doesn't feel right, and I didn't put it in the book. So you don't see the dead ends when you read a book like mine. You might think, oh, this all panned out very nicely. You happen to meet this person in that place. You happen to come across this person at the right time, and that's the distillation of many trips where things have gone wrong. Someone didn't turn up, someone turned out to be a bit of an arse. This is what you see is kind of having sieved through the stuff I was going to say gold, but that sounds quite kind of sounds like I'm quite full of myself, so I won't say gold. But to get to the kind of real nuggets that made it into the book, there were many U-turns. I mean, the other thing you don't really see, and I was talking to another travel writer about this recently, had a book out, is that people don't really see or imagine the many drives along motorways in my 2014 Ford Fiesta, who at the end of this book, my car at the very end of this book was stolen. It had done so many miles up and down the country, stopping in moto services, stopping in welcome breaks, and then having pretty much as I completed the book, it got nicked outside my house in the dead of night, and I never saw it again. But I'm very fortunate that happened after I'd written the book, not before. But yeah, so there's all these sort of very banal mechanics behind writing a book, and stops at Costa Coffees and Greg's and all the rest of it.
Well, okay. So of the pilgrimages that have got in the book, which are the ones that you'd like to re-walk or revisit, if again, and why? Which are the ones that are sort of intriguing ones, or the ones perhaps you would like to go back and rediscover
Mm,
more about yourself? I don't know
mm,
whichever journey you were on, the physical one or the personal one.
I think it's a good question, and I think, you know, all these routes have their own character, and then within that character, called almost like Russian dolls, they have their own selves through different seasons, as it were. I mean, I walked the Ridgeway, for instance, which is a prehistoric track that goes across the Berkshire and the Wiltshire Downs, as I'm sure many people know. Its status as a pilgrimage route is pretty conjectural. We can only guess that by the number of what look to be prehistoric sacred sites along the route, and then kind of infer that there's this necklace thread that goes between them that has some greater meaning. I happen to walk it in autumn, and just so much of that journey was coloured by ideas of death and mortality, both in terms of the you know the dying of the air around me, but of the druids that I met along the way, the neo druids I should say, who had their thoughts very much turned to you know, members of their community who'd passed away. The rituals that they were conducting were very much centered on mortality, and of course I think perhaps it felt like the right time of year to, you know, do as I did, visit the Neolithic burial mounds, in one case sleep inside
I'm going to say, you slept inside a barrow.
Yes, yeah, because I was encouraged to by a local guy who said that was really the way to kind of unlock the unlock the magic of such places. And I did hear weird noises in the night, and I didn't really have an explanation for them. Although I do expect in the cold light day it's probably more likely to be a rat or a mouse than you know, something from a parallel continuum or whatever it might be.
So we're going to get you walking the Ridgeway. You're going to, you know, did you walk in a specific direction, or did you just, you know, log a certain section of it because it had more prehistoric barrows than anywhere else, you know?
I mean, this is an interesting thing about the Ridgeway that I can't quite understand, and perhaps you and your community being walking centered. The Ridgeway guidebooks often cast it as a walk from Avebury to up into the Chilterns, walking eastward. But I mean, it feels to me that the kind of center of gravity for this route has to be Avebury itself. I mean, that's surely the place where we know people gathered. So I found myself reading any number of walking guides about the Ridgeway, and like having to almost read the sentences backwards to make sense of it, which is immensely frustrating. But yeah, I'd like to walk it in summer and get a bit more of a sense of what it's like, you know, at the time when, for instance, when the White Horse is being rechalked, and when there are, I know it's a sort of hotspot for paragliding, for gliders as well, and there's that very interesting interplay between prehistory and flight as well. People seeing these things from as they might have been intended to be seen for the first time at the dawn of the 20th century from the sort of perspective of the gods. That's very interesting as well. So yeah, I'd like to walk that again. I often think about that because my wife's family are in the West Country, and whenever we drive down the M4, there's a stretch of the M4 where the Ridgeway goes across on a quite like grubby concrete bridge, and I always look up at the bridge and imagine, oh, if I could only park up in the hard shoulder and scramble up this turf bank and just go for a walk amongst all the Iron Age hill forts, that would be a simultaneously lovely and dangerous thing to do for all concerned in the car. But yes.
Yeah. I mean, disappearing a couple of 4,000 years back. Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay, so you also went to the extremes of the country. You went to Iona. You went to which I think is probably you know, a destination that practically every child has been taken by their parent. I don't know that. I imagine that Iona is a sort of place that everyone gets taken to at some point in their lives, but they rarely actually go themselves. You know, I always think it's something that you're taken there, but maybe I'm wrong. But you also went right up to the top end of Scotland as well. Is that not right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. The I think, is it the penultimate chapter or the one before the penultimate chapter is about the old forge on the Knoydart Peninsula, which has kind of accrued the language. It's this pub which has kind of accrued the language and symbology of pilgrimage around it, which on the one hand to some people seems quite flippant and quite silly, the idea of going on a pilgrimage for a pint, and I can understand that. And I remember I did have one review where from a religious paper where they said, oh, this has about as much pilgrimage to it as I can't remember what they said, but it was something dismissive anyway. But I do feel that journey where you, as I'm sure some people know, it's a pub you either get a boat to, or you need to walk for 2 or 3 days across one of the wildest parts of the Highlands to get there. But it does have a lesson. I think it is a valid pilgrimage, because you're exiting society for 2 to 3 days, living off your own wits. When I did it, I was entirely alone. I think I saw one walker the whole way in, and the idea of coming in from the cold at a pub has this added resonance, because you're leaving everything that kind of binds society together: a roof over your head, a bit of warmth, some company, some electricity, food and drink. You're exiting all that when you embark on the walk, and then you're re-entering at the other end, and you're seeing it for quite how wonderful it is, and you become grateful, and there's a sort of a more profound kind of element beneath that journey, in my opinion. And it's also the case that the pubs started offering free drinks to people who walked in across the mountains. I think it was after COVID.
That's a hell of a long way to go for a free beer.
It is a long way, but that actually has parallels with the hospitals that would be along the routes of medieval pilgrimage, where you'd have free food and free drink to sustain you along the way. So there's that sort of there's that parallel there between this secular establishment and the religious ones that went before it.
Well, there's lots more, but I mean, before I turn over to the everyone in the room, and please start thinking up some questions for Oliver. One of the ones that really caught me out was surprised me was the Tamil pilgrimage. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
That's something I wonder how many people know about that.
Yeah, I don't think many people do know about the Tamil pilgrimage, but that's a really fascinating one. So. As I'm sure some of you know, there's a little village in North Norfolk called Walsingham, which just before the Norman invasion was the site of a Marian apparition. So the Virgin Mary appeared, and she instructed a particular Saxon noblewoman to build a holy house there. And then through the Middle Ages, Walsingham was on a par with Canterbury, on a par even with Santiago. I think there's some equation, I can't remember what it was. It's something like 3 Walsinghams equals 1 Jerusalem or something. And people from across Britain went to this little village. And then, of course, when the Reformation happened, pilgrimages ended, and nobody really went there until the early 20th century, when it was revived by the Anglican vicar, and he built a new holy house, which was kind of brought about a bit of friction between high church and low church, between those who are more into pilgrimages and ritual and bells and smells, and the people who are a little bit more low church. But this is kind of as Christianity has faded a little among whites, Anglo-Saxons in England, and Walsingham's kind of fallen a bit out of memory for a second time. It's nonetheless extremely popular with people from other backgrounds. And the biggest pilgrimage that they get there is the Tamil pilgrimage, where vast numbers of Tamil people, many of them Christians, but oddly quite a few of them Hindus who go along for the ride, come from Birmingham, come from London, and converge on this tiny little village in the middle of Norfolk. And it's not just them. There's huge numbers of Latin American people go on pilgrimages to this particular place. Irish travellers also go there. So it's sort of strangely, because Norfolk is not really a place renowned for multiculturalism, and many different people from different backgrounds. But there's this tiny pocket in the midst of it that gets this huge diversity of people, and I think a lot of people, even in the Church of England, aren't really aware of that going on.
Yeah, that's great. Now, okay, we've got a couple of questions, so that's good. Bob, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. I can't. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's brilliant. Okay, yeah. No, there's a different sort of pilgrimage, not one physically going, but spiritually going, i.e., inside. So it's just asking a kind of a basic question about assumptions. I mean, right now in England, there's a socialist experiment, which is the first time in the history of the world this has ever been in place. And I spent my whole lifetime looking at the signs. I won't go into it now, but it's here now. I now have reached my ultimate pilgrimage, and it's been a life travel. I just wondered metaphysically how you would compare the two, and how you would justify, need to be middle class to have enough money to travel somewhere or something like that. Or if the idea of walking is you don't need any money to do it, but there's a bit of a hiatus there. So an inner journey is absolutely free, and there's no thing. Just wondered if you have any reflections on that. Questioning the very nature of how you would define pilgrimage.
So I guess the kind of the example that jumps into my mind of the pilgrimage without going anywhere is Julian of Norwich, who the anchoress who hung out where I can't remember what it was, somewhere near the city walls, was it in Norwich? And while being stationary, went on these extraordinary spiritual journeys, and paradoxically, for someone who didn't go anywhere, actually became a focus of pilgrimage in her own right. So it's absolutely true to say that you can go on a spiritual pilgrimage without actually having to move anywhere. That's something that many people have claimed to have done, and I think it's also true that yeah, the idea of walking and pilgrimage, they're sort of automatically, I mean, not automatically, but when you say pilgrimage, people's minds short circuit to walking, but that's not historically always been the case, because I mean, Walsingham at the start of the 20th century, when it had its revival, it was very popular with railway pilgrimages. As the railway shut down, pilgrimage was something that became synonymous with coach trips. And now I think the idea of pilgrimage necessarily being a walk probably arises from the renaissance of the Camino de Santiago in the 1970s and 80s. But yes, yeah, pilgrimage, it doesn't necessarily affix itself to walking, to moving. It's such a nebulous term, that it's people have the license to define it on their own terms, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we've got a nice string of questions, and one person says they've got 3 questions for you, but I'm just going to go Quentin and Anna. I don't know whether it's Quentin or Anna who's asking. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask away?
Brilliant. We're way up in Inverness on a campsite, so someone has to be there for some reason. So my question is, what transformative experience most changed you on this journey, and how has it affected you subsequently?
It's a good question. The way I set out the book to write the book was really I wanted to make it a little bit different to other pilgrimage books, in that it's not a personal journey really. It's a travel book in which I'm reporting on what I'm seeing and the people I'm meeting. But I'd read so many pilgrimage books, some of which I liked and some which I didn't, which put the focus very much on the individual. And I felt in some cases, well, in many cases, it obstructed the places along the way. So I tried to be objective in the book, but at the same time, it was impossible not to be moved by the people I was meeting and the stories they were telling me. I wanted this book really to be told more through other people's voices than my own, which is why I think there's about 70 different people in the book. And yeah, I wasn't immune from hearing from people. I mean, I remember one in particular who was a lovely lady who lost her husband. And in his last month, she travelled to Iona because she thought if there was one place that might save him, whose magic might have some effect on his health, she was convinced it would be Iona. She wasn't a Christian, she wasn't a neo-pagan, but she had faith in that place. And hearing stories like that moved me very, very deeply. And I remember being in the Abbey when they switched all the lights out and they did a candlelit service, and my thoughts were very much on that particular person. And I think whether you're someone who is of faith or not, or who is spiritual, not religious, as many of us are these days, I think hearing stories like that in a particular place, it charges a place with a particular kind of energy. And I don't necessarily mean that in a new age sense. I think it leaves a mood and atmosphere. It invests the place with something. And so I think I did find myself moved by hearing stories like that. And I suppose the transformation, it transformed my perspective on those places. That's how I could best describe it.
At any point, did anything like surprise you where you sort of thought, what, oh, I've had like something switched my perception of how things are, how the world is or operates, like some epiphany, I suppose the religious word would be?
I think the big surprise for me was probably researching the Hillsborough chapter and understanding how to some people a stadium can be equivalent to a church, and speaking to people who made what they did describe to me as pilgrimages, walking across the Pennines from Hillsborough to Anfield, bringing home in their minds those people who've been lost. I'd embarked on writing that chapter feeling that football stadiums were maybe there was something, people had belief in them, people had faith in their teams, there were religious parallels. But I think at the end of writing that chapter, I really did see how particular Anfield was almost a kind of proxy for a shrine, and that was something that really challenged my perspective, I think.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's cool. That I conclude my questions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Nice to chat, Oliver.
All right, Tamsin, it's your turn now. You have to pick one of your three. Which one are you going for? Which is the high priority?
Yes. Hi, Oliver. You said about going backwards along the Ridgeway, and going backwards along the Caminos in Spain is almost impossible. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that, about going westwards instead of eastwards?
Along the Ridgeway, yeah. I mean, I think going westwards is I need to talk quite carefully here, because I think there's a risk I could segue into something quite new age, and that's not really me. But I think going westwards has a particular power to it in a way that traveling eastwards doesn't necessarily. I think in the case of the Ridgeway, I think when you're entering Wessex, there's something that's sort of numinous in our minds about Wessex. I think that's partly to do with Alfred the Great and the kind of Saxon battles. I think it's partly to do with probably to do with Thomas Hardy in large part, and probably to do with the accumulation of prehistoric sites on Salisbury Plain. But I think it's also to do with edges, and many of the pilgrimage places in my book are places that are edges, like Iona. That's where the road runs out. Of course, places like Glastonbury is not so far from the sea. St David's not in my book, but that's another example of somewhere that's the edge of things. Lindisfarne in its own way, even though it's on the east coast, is on the edge of things as well. And of course, that's true as well about Santiago. That's almost not quite where the road runs out, because you can carry on to Finisterre and you can get to the lighthouses there. But a great many people now don't end their pilgrimage in Santiago. They continue to the far edge of the continent, because they see there's something. Well, I suspect it's because they see something powerful in those places where you can go no further, and where you're confronted by the sea, which is something that's almighty and powerful and mysterious and vast, and could be a proxy to something or could be a stand-in for something that's almost metaphysical. So yeah, I think that westward direction for us in Britain, of course, you know, Christianity came to England in large part, and Scotland in large part from the west. Obviously, St Augustine came up to Canterbury, but St Columba and those early Irish saints sort of brought the message from the west. So yeah, I think the west has this particular mystery about it in our country. Does that answer your question? So I've rambled quite a lot.
No, it's fascinating. Thank you.
Okay, Tamsin, what we'll do is we'll come back for another one of your questions in a minute. But first, Kate, would you like to pitch in with yours?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether there was anything, if you had any sort of mission behind writing the book, whether there was something you hoped to achieve by it, maybe encouraging pilgrimage, or maybe encouraging people to appreciate some of the things they already do as pilgrimage, and sort of appreciating them more deeply, perhaps, like going to a festival or walking across mountains to a pub. And just, was there something that you were hoping to achieve?
Yeah, I guess the part of the mission for the book, it was not really, I didn't want to sort of say I wanted to encourage people to go to these places. I didn't really want to sort of be at the vanguard of a renaissance in pilgrimage or anything lofty like that. My basic theory was that, I mean, you probably all heard this description of somewhere being a thin place, where the boundary between the mundane and the metaphysical, the earthly and the heavenly, is thin. That's something I heard everywhere. But I think what guided me was this idea that when you go to those places, the people are thin too, by which I don't mean they're skinny. I mean that their guards are down, they tell their story quickly, they often, you know, pour their heart out to you, where they're in this heightened state of pilgrimage. And that pilgrim places essentially are places we can learn an awful lot about the human condition and the human soul, and perhaps also the national soul as well. So I think that's probably the closest thing I had to a goal in writing this book. And it proved to be true. And I think probably I've come away from it. I mean, driving past places like, I don't know, driving down the A303 past Stonehenge, and obviously it's a big tourist attraction, everyone's having a nice day out and having a picnic. But I realized, you know, that you know, well into the 20th century, this is a place that has a deep, profound resonance to people in terms of their identity, in terms of their faith, in terms of their ideas of belonging in a particular place. This is not a kind of this is not an idle heritage attraction. This is in the minds of many people, not a small number of people, a living shrine. And that's true of many of the places I went to, that, you know, places I might not ordinarily have given a second glance if I'd not written this book, but it really sort of revealed that shadow life, really.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, okay, well, let's have Tamsin in with another one, and then we'll go back to Bob, who's got another question as well. So Tamsin, choose another one of your three.
So I was just thinking back to Bloomsbury, or you, or whoever it was, wanting to get that book published quickly. Is it because it's a bit of a zeitgeist that there's really a lot going on around pilgrimage at the moment, and what are they actually sort of recognizing that? Because I haven't found that publishers are recognizing that, and yet it does seem to be true to me.
Is it a zeitgeist? It's a good question. I think if we pan back and think about decades rather than years, then it's certainly true that it's in renaissance when we think about the Camino de Santiago. I think a lot of people don't realize that the Camino de Santiago is an entirely modern phenomenon, that by the 60s or 70s it was 10 people a year walking it, and then suddenly 10 years ago, I can't quite remember the numbers, but I think it was 250,000 10 years ago. Now it's 500,000 as of last year. So that's a route that's had exponential, I think is the right word, that's had, I think, a trickle down effect into Britain, and it's often I often saw it written that pilgrimage is in Renaissance, and obviously there's things like the British Pilgrimage Trust, which was founded about 10 years ago, and any number of dioceses are starting new routes. And if you go on St Cuthbert's Way on the way to Lindisfarne, that's becoming an increasingly popular route. But then it's hard to generalise, because I mean, for instance, the Pilgrim's Way from Southwark Cathedral to Canterbury, that surprised me how empty that was. I mean, that should be our national pilgrimage, because it has those links with Chaucer. It's the route from the capital to the holiest city in southern England. But I saw almost no one walking it. I think it's, so it is hard to generalize, and it's very much dependent.
But there's nowhere to stay. I mean, that's the problem in the UK.
Absolutely.
There's nowhere to stay, and where there, if you can find somewhere to stay along the Pilgrim's Way, it costs a fortune.
Absolutely.
I do think that's got a lot to do with it. People want to do it, but they can't afford it, and you can't get there by public transport is the other thing.
I think all that is absolutely true, and I would add that along the Pilgrim's Way, I mean, this was a sort of focus of my chapter in the book. When if you go on the Pilgrim's Way from London to Canterbury, and you've got your head full of Chaucer, you're thinking about pubs, you're thinking about churches along the way, you're thinking about places where you'd find company, and where you'd find that humour that's all through Chaucer. And I was absolutely flabbergasted by how many pubs were shut along the A2, along the Old Kent Road. I think on the Old Kent Road, I found one pub that was open. So many had shut down with the pandemic. Cost of living obviously hurt a number of pubs. Village pubs were kind of more gastrofied, and so these things that sustain the path, like you mentioned, the places of accommodation, which would be an inn or wherever it might be, these are becoming rarer on that particular route. And like you say, I mean, what's it going to, if it's a 4 or 5 day walk with £100 a night, I mean, that's going to put it out of the price reach of a great many people. So yeah, banal things like infrastructure are part of what will keep somewhere like that alive. And locked churches as well. That's another sad aspect. I mean, I walked past the Camino, the Camino del Norte in the Basque Country, and all the churches were open, and they had these wonderful canopies, which I'm sure many of you will know, where all around the church, where you're welcome to sleep. I mean, going through affluent parts of Kent and out at London, I mean, so many churches were just locked, and you couldn't go in, you couldn't meet anyone, there was nothing to see. So it was a lonely road, that route from London to Canterbury, and it's sort of one of the things in my book that's sort of in a minor key. I'd say that it's quite sad what's become of it in my point of view.
And Bob says he's got another question if there's time. If you go somewhere, what do you retain when you come back? In other words, is there a social dimension to this, not religious? Do you have to go back again to get it, or is there something else happening? And if so, what is this for you?
I think those things aren't easy to disentangle, the spiritual and the social. I think they go hand in hand. And I mean, I'm thinking some of the experiences I have meeting people on the road. One minute we might have been having a couple of beers in the pub, and the next minute they might have been telling me that they were walking in memories of someone they were lost, or some personal tragedy. So I think those things are in lockstep and not necessarily distinct is what I'd say. I mean, I think it's true that a single pilgrimage can contain so many different moods and emotions. I think there's often something spiritual, but a big part of pilgrimage is bathos and disappointment, and getting somewhere and having built it up so high in your mind that it can't possibly meet expectations, and just being a little bit crushed by quite how earthly it is. And I think, I mean, for an example, that kind of got to me was, I mean, I'd spent a lot of years going to Glastonbury Festival, and I'd sort of skirted around the town, and I'd read an awful lot about Glastonbury in advance of writing my chapter in the history of the New Age there, of Wellesley Tudor Pole. and I visited it for the town centre pretty much for the first time as an adult, and just the amount of tut there, the amount of crap people would sell to people, you know, magic stones, healing crystals, all the rest of it. It was really just quite disappointing, but at the same time I sort of came away thinking, but that is actually the way it would have always been. Many of these pilgrimages had this sort of, you know, economic life of selling relics or you know, selling holy items that were of dubious origin but nonetheless appealed to customers. And that's very much part and parcel of pilgrimage, the commercial aspect. Boozing is a very big part of pilgrimage as well. I mean, as well as the purity. I mean, you need to read Chaucer to understand that revelry, misbehaviour, and general silliness are part of pilgrimage. That's not unique to Britain. I'm thinking of the routes in Japan, where the only way people could travel is in the, I think it was the Edo period, was on pilgrimage, and it was basically just a pretext for going out and getting you know, and getting sloshed basically. So yeah, the spiritual, you know, lives side by side with the silly, the metaphysical with the mundane. All these things kind of are part of the vortex of pilgrimage, really.
Well, Bob's, we still can't unmute Bob, and I for some unknown reason, everyone is, I can't write in the chat. So, you know, technology is wonderful, isn't it? But he says, I'm talking about living it, which is something that is unique about going there.
Oh, sorry, can you repeat that?
He says he's talking about living it, which is something that is unique about going there.
Living it. Yeah, I mean, there's a balance. There was a balance in striking this book in being totally dispassionate and objective, and almost kind of conducting a social historical inquiry, and then kind of having skin in the game, as it were, and really making it a personal quest. So I did try and live it, and I did try and make my thoughts clear, but not to the extent of making it a journey about my own personal, you know, my own soul, or about my own personal development. I mean, I think there's a few reasons for that. One, like I said, I wanted to make about the places more than more about myself, but also because it's really disappointing for me, because I'm someone who doesn't really have much trauma in their life. I've not been a heroin addict, or you know, have something to come back from. I live quite an ordinary, contented life, I'm afraid. And to that extent, I can't really speak so much about my own, you know, healing when I'm kind of reasonably well. Touch wood. He says, touching wood. So yeah, that was another factor in the approach that I took.
Okay, well, Oliver, you've done well. You've answered some good questions, and you've answered them really well. So thank you, Oliver. Okay, Oliver, you have the last word, and yeah, we'll wrap it up there. So over to you, sir.
Well, the last word. Well, I think all that remains for me to say is I still get the creeps when I do online events like this, because it reminds me of lockdown, and I have this horrible feeling that when I'm gonna exit this chat, I'm gonna go and find the pubs are closed, and the policemen have put tape around the children's play area. But this has been a thoroughly enjoyable one. I've really appreciated your questions. I'm really grateful for you coming and listening to me talk about my book. It is still a novel experience for me. I've only done this about 5 or 6, 7 times so far, and every time it's been enjoyable. So yeah, I'm just very flattered and very honoured that you've turned up. And if you do read the book, then I do hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it a bit challenging, a bit illuminating, and I hope. I mean, my background is working for Lonely Planet, and I was producing kind of guidebook content, and I hope that it's also doubles as a guidebook that people could use and set out on their own explorations.
All right, brilliant. Well, look, thanks, Oliver. Thanks very much for coming along. Thank you for writing the book. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and yeah, and wish everyone a really good evening.
Thanks very much, everyone. All the best.